All right, so we're out here in Thompson Woods, and we got a couple of sort of sections or lengths of masonite, which is just basically sawdust board, down on the ground on the forest floor here, and we got some trampling pressure moderated through the boards onto this forest floor. So what we're doing here is we're creating basically a proxy or a simulation for what's going to happen when you throw a tent down. And in wilderness management, our protocols for measuring and mapping and assessing campsites, like condition class, stuff like that, just like with trails, the move is more along these lines, where you got like a national park or any of the established campgrounds, front country campgrounds with roads going to them and stuff, on the Shawnee and stuff like that, like LaRue, Pine Hills, or wherever. Those are established campsites, and they're going to focus a whole lot of the impact onto the established sacrifice zones. We don't care if they're ecologically dead anyway, it doesn't matter. And that's all on purpose. In wilderness, though, it's all good. In wilderness, though, we got a whole bunch of open space on the forest floor where folks could potentially put a tent. Now, granted, that wilderness is usually draped over a more rugged, steeper landscape. So when I say there's a whole bunch of open space, what I mean to say is there's a whole bunch of open space that could be used for hammock camping, because you don't care how steep the slope is with that. But there's generally really pretty small areas that most folks are comfortable or trained enough to throw a tent down and have it be flat enough and pleasant enough. And that doesn't necessarily intersect with where it's sustainable to camp. So we're gonna have situations like this. We got these basically little rectangles of trample down area, and those are gonna be visible.
Would this be the campsite, like a campfire area then?
Yeah,
for
exactly.
The indentation,
Yeah.
Okay.
Same kind of thing.
Log has always been there. I'm just asking just to get a theoretical layout, because this is like a good campsite, so the log's been there. We use it for sitting. Mm-hmm. Our kitchen stove is back there way, stuff like that.
Yeah, and in our trails condition class mapping for Thompson Woods here, right, this little access that cut through the trample down through the mossy surface, that'd be depending on the length of it, if that's continuous, that's going to be closer to 2 with vegetation incision, stuff like that. And if it's a short section that doesn't seem like it goes anywhere beyond 5-10 meters or something like that, then it's that condition class 0. It's just too short to count for anything more.
Are we going to use metric system in this from now on? I'm just asking clarification, because I got to do the computation in my head real quick. When you say 10 meters, it's like, okay, quick, 30 feet.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering, is that what we're going to be using from now on?
Yeah, actually, 15, 20 years ago, when we started putting these protocols together for the Park Service, it was a whole bunch of old school guys who still talked in feet and miles. And then since then, as the Park Service has been kind of running forward on doing science instead of just management, the figures and the protocols have gradually got
more scientific,
converted over. Yeah.
Okay. So when we're measuring water, I haven't taken watershed yet, but do we do that in volume then? If we're looking at the site, then obviously we do it in volume. But I think you understand what I meant though by that question. We're still doing everything in metric though,
cubic meters or versus cubic feet per second.
Yeah.
It depends.
Okay.
In watershed.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I was wondering, does that translate to how we're figuring out the 0 to 5 scale?
So,
everything I asked is for a reason. I know it might be a long-winded word about it, but it's for a reason.
Ultimately it doesn't matter, right? I mean, you can do the conversion in your head pretty fast.
Right, but I was just referring to that as paper-wise.
Yeah,
do we write that down 30 meters on paper versus, because that's why I asked earlier about the whole and you brought up with the management you looked before. So is that the way we're going now in the future? We're sticking with, meters and that kind of zones?
Yeah, so when we're doing the science, that's actually a really good question. When we're doing the science, the measurements and stuff like that, we're working metric. And then you're kind of trying to get a read on you know, we got some good old boys who are going to look at me sideways if I say, but, you know, we have X kilometers of condition class 5 trails, and that's a problem.
I have no idea what a kilometer is.
We'll just...
So 1,000 feet. 1,000 meters. Okay, my bad, dude.
1,000 meters, about 3,000 feet,
3,000
about
feet?
0.6 miles.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, okay. All right, yeah.
That's when you hear them say clicks in those military movies, that's what they're referring to as kilometer.
Yeah. So yeah,
That's stuff.
you get pretty good at on the flat conversions, like 5 kilometers, 3.1 miles, and
That's what like the UTM grid is, right? On topo maps.
meters. Yeah.
It's like 1,000 meters.
Yeah.
So each
Ruffner taught us
grid's
that.
a
1,000.
kilometer. Okay, cool. Sorry.
Yep.
No, that's why Parks is this kind of cool teacher, because we all bring it together for this. And that's
I
why
am really cool.
Now
Anyway.
that his beard and his hair
All right.
vibe it all out.
So we're talking about campsites in the wilderness, and Ian's got some good trampling motion going on over there.
You want me to join you over there, buddy? Looks like you need a fat ass over there.
So the reason we're bringing these boards out here and standing on them and stuff like that is we create a whole bunch of pounds per square inch when we're walking across this stuff, and we create a whole lot less pounds per square inch when we lay out across it. All right, so we're making trails pretty fast.
It's not the same.
We're making campsites slower. So we get some pounds per square inch going on, all right? And a couple minutes of standing on this, but spreading out that pressure across the board, that's gonna be about right for one night's worth tossing and turning on the ground. So let's pull the boards up real quick.
That looks like about what a tent does.
Yeah,
Doesn't that look like
exactly
about what a tent does?
Yeah.
Okay, so about how long do you think it would take for this to recover? This is one bag night of trampling pressure on this vegetation and stuff like that. Day, 2, 3 days.
Depending on like
Yeah.
vegetation,
3
right?
days, yeah.
Yeah.
Here, there seems to be a lot of grasses underneath the leaf litter.
And
Uh-huh.
also it just
With the-
rained.
yeah.
So that's going to poof it up faster. So if it rains,
Yeah.
it's going to instantly drop.
Yeah.
But
The soil's gonna stay compacted
Yes.
for a lot longer than
Bingo.
Yes.
You got it.
Soil compaction is going to be high. Surface vegetation and surface conditions will probably bounce back pretty quick.
All right. So in ecological terms, now we have a trampling rate. We know it's going to take a couple of days of recovery to get this back. Now, if this person, packs up their tent, hikes down the trail, never sees this spot again, nobody ever uses the spot again, 2-3 days later, it's fine. That's right. Tree falling in the woods hasn't made a noise because nobody heard it, right? So, in that sense, we got to also think about now, what's the human side of this? So what if somebody else does come down the trail and they're hiking along and we're, 15, maybe 20 feet from the trail, and they see this and they see a little fire scar and they think, oh, well, this is a pretty good camp spot. And the previous person stopped right here for a reason. Like, this is about as far as they made it that day, for example.
Yeah.
So you get a whole bunch of what's called releaser cues, where the next person says, oh, somebody else did this, that's a good idea, they're saving me some work. They already got a little fire area set up, they got a flat spot all sort of pounded out already, and now it's not just one bag night recovering, now it's 2, 3, 5, 10 bag nights, could be hundreds of bag nights in a very popular spot right next to and visible from the trail. Make sense? Yeah.
Question. So what if the Forest Service, because you brought it up on our canoe trip, like up the dugouts on the shore, what if they're structured for that? Like sand dunes. Sands are supposed to pop back pretty quickly. It's basically a sponge.
Yep.
So is that why a lot of the, areas that are long-term camping are more sandy, because it's more like a foam? It won't affect the surface as much as it will like soil.
Yeah.
Compact it too damn much, where it'll take like maybe 100 years on those sites to recover and bounce back.
Yeah, so sites that are aggressively renovated by water flow or rain, we're gonna go with it. Especially sand. Like, even wind resculpts sand within a matter of minutes to hours.
Right.
So a Great Sand Dunes National Park and Preserve, they got these 600-700 foot high dunes.
They're not too worried about the sand damage.
It's
terrain
constantly
damage,
getting
because
scoured by the wind.
It's
Yeah.
always changing daily,
Yeah.
hourly. Versus like if we're in Kentucky, land between the lakes before it was converted to
Right.
what it was before, like it was when it was actually towns and shit. Like now that it's all that damage has been done, as you said before in the beginning of the semester, it's you can't fix it. Like you can bring in 70 truckloads of soil and you still won't be able to touch what's damaged.
Exactly.
Okay. Is that
So
what
here-
the point of that was?
Exactly, yeah. So what Ian was saying a second ago was that the soil is not going to bounce back as quickly, but at least the vegetation and coarse organic debris, that's going to spring back pretty fast and at least remove the releaser cue to buy the soil time as the next person just walks on by this spot, not realizing that this was a camp spot. So this is called stealth camping, right? Or leave no trace camping, where the next person shouldn't be able to have any inkling that anybody was ever here. So we're grabbing some leaves from over here, we're throwing them right there and letting stuff spring up underneath that camouflage, basically.
But there's like two schools of thought for this.
Yeah.
We talked about it over summer camp, where you either disperse the camping as much as possible,
That's right.
or you do like the sacrificial zone
Concentrate.
of a campsite,
Yep.
and you concentrate it
Yeah.
as much as possible.
Yeah.
So in wilderness areas, you'd probably lean more towards dispersing it.
Exactly. Except for extremely high use wilderness areas where even those sites are designated. So, for example, in the wilderness quarter inside the Grand Canyon, that is federally designated wilderness, capital W. And there are very specific places that you can camp. And your permit has you on those specific campsites, which is kind of restrictive for wilderness, but it's the Grand Canyon, right? It's a whole lot of this vertical and not a whole lot of this where you can stick tents horizontal. So that means we got to concentrate onto those sites that are sustainable for that. Or if they're not sustainable, we'll sort of formalize them and make them sustainable. Yeah.
Side note, to piggyback off Nash, I was a little distracted. What about those cats that side camp on the side walls? Like they hang? Does that have damage to the rock?
Yeah.
Or
Absolutely it does. Yeah. So that's called using a portaledge, and it's basically a space frame of aircraft aluminum. Yeah, it's like a rigid hammock, and you anchor right into the wall.
do not do this.
Yeah, so the impact is in the permanent modification, you sink into the anchor, into the rock face. And remove it.
And remove it. In some cases, when your protection pops, you can really damage the rock face. You don't do it.
Parks, we talked about that. You got those morons, that rocket collar goes around. The reason why I brought that up is because you said that last year in class with the damage.
All right, so we've seen empirically with our own eyes that this factor of the recovery rate versus the impact rate, if the recovery rate is greater than the impact rate, disperse the impact across the entire space. All of the square footage or square meters that are available for throwing a tent down, have people do that. And specifically where they see evidence of somebody previously camping there, those are the only places you can't throw down a tent. That's a very, very common, like at-large or wilderness or stealth camping requirement, because it's super easy for, in particular, the Forest Service likes to lean into this, where, like, if everybody's following that rule, they don't have to do any campsite management across those millions of acres of wilderness because nobody's creating a site.
Because everyone's following the rules.
Exactly, exactly.
But also, camper.
The average camper doesn't exist, and
Well, I know.
so so what Nash is talking about here with concentration versus dispersing, that's just the management decision rule based on the graph that you and I just basically populated with our feet out there, okay? So, if you have, no, just some schmutz off of the board.
It's not cocaine. Relax, boys.
So if you look at the impact rate over time, or the impact rate per bag nights on a specific spot, then you get the following graph with 0 bag nights and nights of trampling pressure and percent impact. So 100% impact, 0, 10, 100, 1,000 for 3 years of camping on the same spot. It's a logarithmic scale. You're adding zeros instead of incrementing. You get this. It's an S-shaped curve. So if there's no bag nights, no impact. If we have 1 bag night, no impact, right? It's going to spring back after a couple of days. So, no impact. With 2, 3, 4, okay. Maybe none, depending on the soil type and the vegetation. Maybe in something a little bit more marginal like semi-arid or desert. We're starting to get into some legit vegetation and soil impact, so it starts ticking up. And then it goes up like this. It doesn't take a lot more than whatever tipping point is present to get up to 100% totally impacted, right? So bare soil, also super compacted soil, so any precip that hits is perched on top of that compacted soil. So it's muddy and disgusting, so you pitch your tent around the edge of that, and then you're compacting that, and it just grows and grows and grows and grows. So you get these concentric rings of dead, 90% dead, 50% dead, 10% dead. And it's just like a bullseye. Very, very, very common thing, and these get bigger. The 10% impacted radius is huge and fat, where the core, as it's called, is typically pretty small, about the size of one or a couple of tents. So, all this to say, when you do this trampling stuff at a whole bunch of different ecosystems and precip regimes and busy, popular places where folks are always going to the same spot versus across, huge dispersed areas where a particular valley or copse or draw or cove might see one group of visitors every several years kind of thing, right? So pretty low use. This is the graph, this is the relationship that we're basing all that management on, this sigmoidal or S-shaped curve. So where your use is low, meaning your impact is also low, disperse. Where your use is necessarily very high, 100 plus bag nights in the same area, in the same spots even, right? So every single weekend is about 100 nights a year, Friday and Saturday across 52 weeks a year. That's gonna be enough to not only open a site, but make it almost essentially permanent in its impacts. And the recovery rate after you close down a site and so forth, right, it ramps up to fully impacted real fast on the order of 1 year, 2 years of use, and then it's there. You can start seeing it from space or aerial photography. Okay. The impact rate takes a lot longer to drop back down to 0 after you close a place down. So because of that, if we have anything more than minimal use, we're gonna see heavy impacts. And so where our use level is actually up here on the curve, we're gonna concentrate onto a few sites. So the Grand Canyon, that wilderness area, it's huge. But in terms of actually useful, functional places to throw down sleeping bags, not huge. So we're going to force people onto those specific spots, make them ecologically dead, sacrifice zones. And we'll have a few large sites. We'll have a million small sites down at the dispersed end of the range, but they only live for a day or 2 or 3, and then they're invisible and buying time for the soil to recover and so forth. What we don't want to do, what the maximum problem, the least responsible management is that sort of uncomfortable in-between space where use is high enough to open and keep a site open, and it's not able to recover. That is where we get a whole bunch. This could be literally hundreds of medium-sized campsites that are, like our trails, condition class 3 or 4. It's a bare open spot, maybe a little bit of, gully erosion down the middle of the site, so you pitch your tents on either side and stuff like that. This is a huge problem. This is where we are impacting wildlife, right? The wildlife, they can live with a couple of large, ecologically useless sites to them because humans are concentrated on them. They'll just go around them. They can live just fine with this because we're not even killing the vegetation in the site of the campsite down at the dispersed end of the range.
We're not even on their radar for them.
Exactly, right? It still smells like people for a couple of days, but that forage is still there, that cover habitat is still there once we're gone and so forth. Good to go. So that middle ground of neither hot nor cold, where we're not being responsible and concentrating, or our users are not being responsible and dispersing, this is where we get not just hundreds of campsites, literally hundreds, but this could be lots of hectares. Just kidding. If you ever use the word hectare unironically, you'll be murdered in your sleep. Yes?
This kind of reminds me of when I was on a road trip up the West Coast. I was in the Lost Coast of Northern California, and basically the road just dead end at a trailhead where there was a campsite like established with like, I don't know, 20 campsites.
Yep.
But it was all full. And I was like, well shit, like I'm too far to turn around.
You're committed, right?
Yeah, I started reading the sign, and you could pay for dispersed camping to follow the trail of the trailhead, and the rule was you had to be at least 1,000 yards from the trailhead before camping. So sure enough, I just go 1,000 yards up the beach at the beginning of the trail, and there's like pretty much a campsite, like right there.
Exactly
like,
there,
all right,
yeah.
This is my home for the next couple nights.
And that's okay, because you did the responsible thing, right?
Yeah.
You dispersed away from like everybody that was right there at the end of the road.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, it was an awesome campsite.
Yeah, exactly.
Only ever had a couple people walk past, but.
Right, so you get the benefit of the high quality amenity, the high quality experience that you're looking for just putting in the work of walking, 1,000 yards?
Yeah.
Whatever it was?
Dragging a cooler 1,000 yards of sand.
Yeah.
First part.
Yeah, not the end of the world, right? And you get a pretty nice sight out of it versus everybody else.
It's all clustered together.
All clustered together, all up in everybody else's business, which, for some people, that kind of social scene, that's the point. Like, that's what they came for. Oh, this is where we always go on Friday nights, and we know we're going to see a whole bunch of other people there, and, everybody's looking at everybody and getting drunk and hooking up or whatever. But that's actually a sign of the system working. Like, whoever's managing that camping, they know all about that
Right.
end of the road camping. Like, it's not hard to find, you know? And so that can be a low-key sacrifice zone, right? You can do both of these. You can have people disperse, and you know there are going to be a bunch of numbskulls who are just going to camp right next to the sign that says no camping right here, you know? And, I mean, as long as everybody's aware of the deal, you can sort of tacitly let that happen. As kind of a pressure valve, because not everybody wants to or will disperse
Right.
1,000 yards. Right, so you're going to get some people who disperse and they're dragging their cooler through the sand, and so they're like, okay, well, you know, we've probably gone 1,000 yards. They've gone 100 yards. You know, that's a problem. That's this middle ground where they're creating a whole bunch of sites and they're not fully dispersing. So this is where we get maximum impact. And so this is true everywhere you look for it. This happens in tropical spots. This is all over Haleakala National Park in Hawaii. This is in subarctic places like the Kodiak coast, southern coast of Alaska, in the forests up there. Everything in between. The George Washington Jefferson National Forest, GWJF, just outside of DC, in Virginia, is this. There are so many campsites right off the edge of the road, right off the edge of some of those forest roads in there, that it's like, this sounds like it's an exaggeration, but it can be 300 or 400 yards of what used to be a bunch of individual truck pull-offs in the 70s and 80s. But since it's all been continuously used in that time, from one end to the other for hundreds of yards at a time, it's just blown out, destroyed, messed up. There's a whole bunch of like airsoft pellets and half-melted beer cans and broken glass bottles. For all of it, it's all one gigantic campsite, even though people carve out a specific spot in it. That's this. That's this terrible middle ground of people aren't really dispersing, they're not really concentrating, or they're concentrating wrong and it's not actually concentrating, it's just like metastasizing, it's just growing like cancer out past the edges of the boundaries, and it just keeps getting worse and worse and worse. So this is hard to reverse, because this is like the swimming hole. This is the traditional spot where, man, my parents were going here to hook up on Friday nights, you know, at the big party area at the end of the road at the beach, and stuff like that.
Towns have that like local.
Yeah, right. The quarry,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, exactly. So, where you are the wilderness technician or the guy coming in on, you know, your first temp seasonal or something like that, you want to ask around and figure out, what are my problem spots where this has been a problem? We know it's been a problem. It's been a problem for decades, because nobody's really sort of taken it on and shut that down and got people dispersing. Where you have proactive managers who are writing tickets for a while, you know, breaking up the party a little bit, because this is not just unsightly, it's not just more of a safety risk for all the people involved, because there's a bunch of typically drunken or recreational drug using folks causing, not just having fun, but causing problems for each other. Like, it only takes a couple to really ruin the night for everybody, right? Break it up and get folks on some well-managed sites where it's concentrated. We'll get presence patrols, all that stuff, basically turn it into another front country camping area at the edge of the wilderness or right outside the edge of the wilderness, and manage that and provide for the legit motivation to have a Friday night place to go and have a good time without totally destroying not just this, but everything else around it. That's okay, right? So, some of the, like at Kaibab and Coconino National Forest, where there's a ton of demand and pressure to camp near the Grand Canyon, but not inside the national park. There's some of this left over, but by and large, it's sorted pretty well now into concentrated stuff and a million stealth sites if you know where to look. Or if you use any of the services that have GPS coordinates for sites that are very, very lightly used and are super nice. So, all this to say, right, when you see people just absolutely chip shredding or, gyro tracking through your forest wilderness area, this is what's going on. This is what this graph is sort of categorizing what you're seeing on the ground. If it's a whole bunch of just laid down vegetation like we just created out there in Thompson Woods, that's a sign of this, and that's working, because you're not seeing a bunch of open, established campsites that are this, in this sort of untenable middle ground. And granted, this untenable middle ground is only 50% impacted, but this can be dozens to some hundreds of acres across a forest of pretty impacted area, whereas this is totally dead up here, these concentration sites, but they're tiny because they're each the size of like a camping group. Yeah.
So something local is like Garden of the Gods Wilderness area.
Yeah.
And there's a trail that I really enjoy that always has like some really nice campsites on it. And the first one you come across is at the like 3 mile mark.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's like a smaller one. And then you've got like a larger one that's like out on a rock outcrop that now doesn't have much vegetation or soil on it. I don't know if it ever did. But that's a much larger one, but you come across that at like mile 4. And then you have more at like mile 8 along a creek. And then it's a loop trail, so it loops back and you kind of come across a couple more. Would that be, because Garden of the Gods is a really small wilderness area, but I'm also pretty sure it has a fairly high use.
Oh yeah.
So would that be an instance of concentrating camping?
Yes.
Or the middle part?
Yes. All right. So.
Yes to both.
Yeah. So this is another way you can re-access this graph is impact per use density, number of bag nights per acre, something like that, instead of just bag nights. So normalize it with a rate per acre. Garden of the Gods is way up at the top end of this range in terms of use density, and because it's lots of people, that could be high use density right there. Or if it's very small with not a ton of people, that's still very high use density, number of people or number of bag nights per acre. Garden of the Gods is both, right? Lots of people and not a lot of acres. So it's way up at the extreme top right end of this chart. So if you take a look at Garden of the Gods in its layout, what they've done is essentially set up the entire trail corridor system as the sacrifice zones, knowing that some folks are gonna camp along the way, but it's really gonna be an absolute heck ton of day use.
Not in the wilderness, you can do it in the wilderness area.
Oh, I thought you weren't supposed to camp overnight, Geo.
No, like the Garden of the Gods tourist spot where there's like some trails.
Yeah,
and
the
roads
Garden of
there
the
you
Gods
can't
spot
camp
that
there.
everybody thinks of as Garden of the Gods, that rock formation, that's not in the wilderness.
Yeah.
The wilderness starts right at the bottom of those rock faces.
This trail's really cool. It's like,
Yeah.
I could draw it very basically, but I think visualizing is pretty easy. If you go around, there's like the Garden of the Gods drive-up area with all of the rock formations. And then the wilderness area takes up this like cool, like kind of ridge to ridge valley area. It starts on the backside. The trail I'm thinking of is like a 13-mile trail that you start on the back end of that wilderness area.
You go down and around.
And you go down, you go into the tourist spot, and then you come back around to the back out.
Okay, so I
It's
walked
really
half of
cool.
it, yeah.
It's called like the Garden of the Gods backdoor loop trail. It's a good trail. Ish. Horses use it as well in sections, so the trail gets kind of beat up.
Shit, we got one. I don't want to go to Civ. Hey, can we keep keep going on so we don't do silviculture? Like, can you just like block out the class?
Yeah, was that Professor Browninger?
Yeah.
Yeah, tell him to suck it.
Tell them suck some eggs.
No, tell me how you really feel. No.
He's
All
like,
right.
what, the dean?
So
Yeah,
he's an associate dean. So just to kind of tie this off, the way that you put this into action is you go out and you walk all your trails. And while you're condition classing trails, like we're doing for Thursday on Thompson Woods here, you're also looking for campsites because by and large, people are just going to be day walkers or creating campsites that are easily accessible and typically visible from the trail network. So
Yeah, these campsites
that's
are-
how you're looking for them as well, because that's how visitors are getting those releaser cues of, oh, somebody else camped here, let me camp right here. This is a good spot. And then you take all that data, you throw it on this chart, it's just a scatter plot, and you see where on the S-shaped curve. And the S-shaped curve will be steeper or shallower based on your ecosystem. Like desert will have a vertical cliff
Yeah.
wall here.
More woods will have more.
Yeah, a mesic temperate forest will have more of a ramp at the bottom here. It can tolerate a lot more impact. It can resist more impact before it starts to collapse. And then you look where the clusters are and you concentrate. If you got a whole bunch of this, you keep it dispersed and you enforce the disbursement if things are still down here. And if you get the very common and unfortunate setup where, yeah, we got a lot of sites that are half permanent, okay, we're gonna have to step in and renaturalize a bunch of those sites, enforce the dispersal, provide a couple of concentration sites right outside the edge of the wilderness, and obvious to people so that we can manage those as campgrounds basically, and kind of go from there.
Is
All
that
right.
where you'd go, like, as far as putting like a split rail fence? And
Yeah.
just, like, a
Yes.
sign?
Yeah. Yeah, so
You get mounties to
split rail
strike
fence
which-
around the backside of the concentration areas to keep it from spreading into the wilderness.
Yeah.
Split rail fence around each one of these. And by split rail, that's a halfway permanent kind of installation. So what we're gonna do is typically what's called post and rope. It's like a wooden stake. It's like 36 inches tall and just like string some coarse twine over to the next one, 10 feet over. Hang a little sign on there saying revegetation area.
Don't
Yeah,
camp here.
in-
Yeah,
in
if you just
Zion-
put up a fence, folks will go right over it. You have to explain why you're doing this. Yeah.
When we backpacked Zion and they put us, because you have to go to the specific campsites, they specifically told us that campsite boundaries designated with logs.
Yeah.
Like downed logs.
Yeah.
And
Those are called
we
coping lines.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
we are not